With the coming of November, a grey blanket has descended upon us here in the north on most days, not only in Denmark but in all the Nordic countries. Well, tea or coffee for starters is something that gets many of us through the month of November. Tea to give us comfort, coffee to keep us awake, and a few more things that help me at any rate, two of which are perhaps slightly more extreme, but I'll get to them later in the video. A Danish poet, Henrik Nordbrandt, has written a poem called Året har 16 måneder, which roughly means there are 16 months in a year. December, January, etc. And then he continues, October, November, 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 November. Because he felt the month of November was endless and depressing. He hated the dark and the cold and didn't always thrive in Denmark. You can see my current selection of pucker teas here. They have some of my favorite teas. Definitely coffee now because it's still morning. And comfort food, of course. This is skyer, that brilliant Icelandic invention. And I've put in lots of good stuff. Berries, oats, almonds, flax seeds, all sorts of good stuff. My father would have agreed with the poet. One of the main reasons he decided to move our family to California many years ago was the Danish winters. The dark grey wetness, the cold. Every year when November rolled around, he would act like a caged animal. In my later years, I can kind of see his point, hence this video. Though to me it's mostly the lack of light that's the problem. I'm fine with the cold, if it's not too cold. I have a friend who feels much the same as the poet and my father. I have another who's not much influenced by the weather at all, or by the seasons. So there's no remedy that fits us all. We each need and do different things, depending on how we view the month of November, which may also be dependent on where we live in the world. Since I live in a Nordic country that no longer has any snow in November, I sometimes have to pull myself together at this time of year. Though not as much as when we reach January. In November, the end of summer or the beginning of fall is still fresh in our minds. We haven't waded through months of darkness yet, and Christmas is around the corner. But I still need to actively do things to keep my spirits up instead of just landing in an armchair and not getting up until it's time for bed. One of the things I try to do is get out every day to get some light and vitamin D and some fresh air. It's easy enough when it's dry and the sun is shining, not so easy when it's murky and wet, not to mention dark. I try also to deliberately notice little things in the garden or out in nature. Not all color is gone yet. Sometimes things actually look more interesting this time of year, when the light is subdued and plants and trees are at the stage where they're closing down for the winter. It's the cycle of nature and we might as well embrace it. Which brings me to gratitude. I'd like to thank everybody who's left positive comments on some of my videos. It means a lot to me, I really appreciate it. If you haven't left any comments, I appreciate you being here anyway. And I'm out in the garden saying this simply because I can. It's not pouring down right now and it hasn't begun to get dark yet. But then it's only 2:15, so we have a few more hours of daylight, but that's about it. Having small projects is also a good idea for most of us, I think. We can't feel our way out of a bad mood or a sense of inertia or November gloom. We have to act our way out of it, however tiny those projects may be. This is the neighbor's cat, by the way. They got a dog earlier this year, and since then their cat has lived mostly in our garden. It's old and gentle, so it's actually kind of nice to have an extra cat around. And then, if you can believe it, I went on a little climate march, which was organized to coincide with the climate conference in Glasgow these days. I'm not especially political, but I do believe in saving our planet. Something that also works for me is to go on small day trips, or even just leave your own little domain for a few hours. It sounds banal and obvious, but sometimes a brief trip can snap you out of things, allow you to get out of your own hair and notice that the world is still out there. I went to the sea on a beautiful but chilly day and tried cold water swimming, or winter bathing as we call it, for the first time. It was partly a success. It took so long for us to walk out far enough, on rocks, and all that time it was really cold on the legs. The temperature was around 9 degrees Celsius, which is about 48 degrees Fahrenheit, so it wasn't even that cold. But we took too long walking out before we ever got to dip our whole bodies in. It's supposed to be really good for your circulation and your mood, and it's become extremely popular in Denmark in recent years. Here I am, relieved that it's over. And then I spotted the bridge that connects my island of Funen to the island of Zealand. It was pure bliss to put on warm clothes again and settle down with a warm cup of tea. That's where hygge comes in for us Danes. In fact, it's probably the darkness and the cold that induced our ancestors to invent the concept in the first place. Something to counteract the feeling of gloom this time of year. I hope you're able to keep your spirits up this time of year. Should you manage to do none of these things and instead fall into a Netflix hole or similar, you have my blessing. I wish you all the best.